Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, April 20th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about President Joe Biden and his potential re-election bid and how his chances at winning re-election have tremendously increased over the past 6 months. Looking back at the 2021 and 2022 elections, there were high expectations that Republicans would do quite well, especially following Glenn Youngkin's victory in the Virginia gubernatorial race just around 2 years ago. Now, the Virginia victory for the Republican Party, actually a year and a half ago, was a monumental one. It was a turnover in favor of the Republicans in a Biden plus 10 state. It was an indication that the approval rating of President Biden was serving to be an extreme detriment to Democrats and their elections. But then came around special elections in 2022 where Democrats either improved or did exactly how they did in 2020, either maintaining the status quo or improving off their former House margins. Then came the 2022 midterm elections in which Democrats barely lost control of the House, expanded their seats in the U.S. Senate, and ultimately proved in numerous governor races and many other races as well that the President Biden approval rating did not make much of an impact on their election. But those were separate Democrats. Those were not President Biden, and they were not the same people on the ballot that the American public very clearly disapproves of, at least on the national level. Not so much to an extent that says that his disapproval rating means he's overall disapproved in every state, but in the ones that matters, you can see a numbers reason as to why Democrats are at least initially apprehensive at the re-election chances of the incumbent president. But on my side of things, I'm looking at it from the lens that much more factors matter. Many more factors matter than just presidential approval. If it has shown us anything, it is that President Biden and his electability and his ability to push Democrats over the finish line is a lot more resilient than that of President Obama's. When you see in 2010, when President Obama was disapproved of by just 10 points, translating to a 7-point national victory for Republicans, that's where you start to see a problem, to a point where more Americans approved of Obama on the overall net versus how many actually voted for Republicans. More voted for Republicans than those who disapproved of President Obama. That is where the problem lied during the 8 years between 2009 and 2017 for the Democratic Party. But now it seems as if the presidential approval is not as much of an indicator of electability as we otherwise might think. As the 2024 race shapes up on the Democratic side, really being not much in terms of major contenders against Joe Biden, what we are finding is that this is very much going to be a landslide renomination for President Biden. There likely won't be any national debates. There likely won't be any type of major contested primaries, maybe a few states like we saw in 2012 that would shift away from President Biden. But realistically, at least from the practical lens, we know that many senators, many representatives, many governors will never jump ship from endorsing a re-election bid, as we have seen historically, proven time and time again, that President Biden is on track to win renomination, and now on track to win the election. Now, the reason why I say that boils down to a bunch of factors, as I mentioned previously, but none more important than his Republican opponent. As Donald Trump starts to increase, there's all of these questions about how do you stop Donald Trump? How do Republicans prevent the loser of the 2020 presidential election from being renominated in 2024? And the answer is that you don't. You see, the problem here lies in the fact that Donald Trump still has a considerable portion of the Republican base on his side, a base that has continued to increase over the past couple of weeks. He started off in July of 2022 with around 53% of voters on his side. Today, he's down at 52%. A 1-point decrease in nearly a year is not the worst place he could be. In fact, he was at much worse places when it came down to head-to-head matchups against Ron DeSantis or in these multiple-way primary polls that we see nationally. You see, 53% was where he was back in July, but just as recently as March, a month ago, Donald Trump was at 43%. But then came the indictment. Then came a number of factors on the outside that pushed Republicans to consolidate around President Trump. Ron DeSantis went down from being at 31% down to just 24% today, with not many other candidates increasing in terms of overall support. What we find here is that Donald Trump is dominating the primary field and will likely continue to do so over the next couple of months and well into the primary. So how does this relate to the presidential election? Well, it practically determines everything. While many states are going to be their solid and expected safe blue and red states, there are a number of them that we consider to be swing states. Let's go through them now. We have a number of states. I think the state of Texas actually should be included there. Nebraska's second. Alaska, some people think might be competitive in 2024. I don't agree. I think on the presidential level, it's still going to remain its reliably red status. Mary Peltola was against a uniquely unpopular candidate, Governor Sarah Palin, who also will be in a competitive race in 2024. Not to say that I don't expect her to win, but just more so that we need to keep an open mind as to, not an open mind, but more so an understanding that still Alaska is not a blue state, not even a competitive one, realistically speaking. But looking at all the states I'm characterizing right now, some were larger margins than Alaska in 2020. I'm free and open to that criticism as well. But these are our reliable swing states, the ones that we typically refer to, and ones that Democrats and Republicans have gone back and forth on over the past couple of election cycles, 20 years, the 21st century swing states. We have 232 electoral votes where we can reliably say these are states that both parties are going to be vying for, at least on a competitive level, on an equal level, when it comes down to the election. The thing about Joe Biden is that he wins over regions that Hillary Clinton was unable to do. The Rust Belt region was where Joe Biden was able to actually win, but also in two new states, Georgia and Arizona, which are only starting to increase in terms of the Democratic Party vote share. Republicans will still probably win in states such as Iowa and Ohio and Florida, as Donald Trump and many other Republicans have seemingly now locked down these states away from being won by the National Democratic Party. But it is interesting, though. Looking at these swing states, Joe Biden is in a uniquely powerful position because should Republicans renominate Donald Trump, it's going to be very much a repeat of the 2020 presidential election. You see, right now, people expect Joe Biden and Donald Trump to be their respective nominees. Not only is it the polling data, not only is it the endorsement data, but it is also the betting market data. And the reason why that matters is because betting markets are where people put money where their mouth is. It isn't just me behind, my microphone telling you how it is. People are actively contributing dollars and dollars, hundreds of dollars in some cases, thousands of dollars in some cases, towards who will actually win, which means they're going to look at it from a nonpartisan sense, meaning that there are people out there that I'm sure would love it to be Kristi Noem, Glenn Youngkin, Nikki Haley, but feasibly, reasonably, Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis will probably be the nominee. But right now, Donald Trump is in the lead, and it wasn't always like that. You can see over the past 3-month trend that Donald Trump has taken quite an advantage over Ron DeSantis recently. It looks like the DeSantis bump, as many people referred to it, is now gone. For Joe Biden, he wasn't always in this very prominent position. You can see over the past 3 months, sure, he's been able to get himself up there, but there were periods of time, extended periods of time, where he was below 50 cents, meaning below, according to the betting markets, a 50% chance at winning renomination. Then you fast forward to the numbers that come down for the 2024 presidential election, and you can see that Democrats are starting to take it away from Republicans. For a while, Republicans were in the lead. For a while, Republicans were able to win over the Democrats when it came down to the betting odds. But at the end of the day, it was always close, and today it is no longer. There's a reason for that. There's a reason now, seeing in this potential matchup, why I would personally believe that Joe Biden wins all the states that he won in the last presidential election. It's not unreasonable to think so. It's not unreasonable to think that the president who lost these states before would go on to lose them again, and the president that won these swing states before would go on to win them yet again. Not much has changed in terms of public perception on Donald Trump or Joe Biden. In fact, things have gotten worse for President Trump. The 2020 election was pre-January 6th. The 2020 election was pre-election denial. The 2020 election was pre-many members of the party either leaving the party and speaking out against the Republicans or, fully pushing themselves away from Donald Trump or clinging themselves onto him. You have, what people would determine to be crazy people in Congress in some senses. You have people out there who are using that term to describe members of our elected representative system. The reason being, many of them see the close association with President Trump, the conspiracy theories that are brought up about the Dominion voting systems, about the election. All of these things are factors that come into play. All of these things are reasons why I think Donald Trump is not as electable now as he was in 2020. And even in 2020, I did not expect him to win. I had him losing more than he actually lost by, but I can imagine now how that map becomes more realistic, how the map that I expected in 2020 could actually come to fruition. I never had Texas as a blue state. I had Florida as a blue state once, North Carolina as a blue state. My final prediction, it was North Carolina and Florida that were incorrect. I ended up being wrong by 2 states. It wasn't, my proudest moment, but it also was quite close. And I think looking ahead to 2024, I don't think Florida's going to go blue, but I could reasonably see how Joe Biden wins the state of North Carolina, especially considering how close it was in the last election. I think one thing that we are forgetting is that while Donald Trump is doing well on the Republican side, he is losing on the national level. And another driving factor as to why President Biden's approval rating is so low is not necessarily because it is low amongst independents or Republicans. It is low amongst Republicans and slightly low amongst independents. His approval rating is that exceptionally low amongst Democrats. You can see some polls that show the Democratic Party approving of President Biden with 70, 80%, sometimes even in the 60s. Why is that significant? Because it means that the Democratic Party, the party that will still very much vote for him in the general election, is disapproving of his job performance. What you saw with President Trump was that the numbers really didn't tell us much because 90% of Democrats disapproved, 90% of Republicans approved. Same thing with Obama, same thing with Bush, with taking out the exceptions of the bumps, the same thing with prominent presidents. But recently, there has been a movement on the younger portion of the left that has come to say, I do not approve of President Biden. But that doesn't stop them from voting blue. It doesn't stop them that in a matchup between Donald Trump and Joe Biden from voting for him for re-election. That's why these approval rating numbers, I think, really haven't translated to the losses that we might have expected to see had this been Obama, had this been Trump. You see, the problem is that Republicans never disapproved of Donald Trump. Even after the insurrection, his numbers dropped to the low 80s and then bounced back up a month later to the high 80s and low 90s. The approval rating of Joe Biden is dragged down, yes, by Republicans and independents, but also Democrats. You could not reasonably have told me 3 years ago that a Democratic president who was disapproved of nationally by 10 points would have a fighting chance, not only a fighting chance at re-election, but the favorite to win re-election. I would not have believed it against anyone. But that's the beauty of this all, that the polls that we used to rely on sometimes no longer count. Sometimes they're thrown out of the window. So what I see with this approval rating of President Biden, what I see with this rematch election shaping up between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, I think Joe Biden and the Democratic Party camp cannot be complacent, but I think they should absolutely be, at least in some way, happy that their chances at re-election have increased. Presidential elections are almost always close, especially recently. Even the ones that can be seen as quote-unquote landslide elections, namely Bill Clinton in 92 and 96. Look at the margins in those states. Sorry about my Google Calendar going off. But look at the margins, right, in those states. Look at how close it was. Had any of the states been shifted by 5 points, George H.W. Bush might have been reelected, or Bob Dole might have won his race. There are things there, or maybe narrowly lost, versus 379 or 375. Regardless, what we know, and the same thing applies to 2020, is that elections are close. They are close at a default, and for this one, I do not know if I believe the same thing I believed in 2020. I think Joe Biden's chances at winning this race are higher than they were in 2020. That is under the assumption that Donald Trump is the nominee. But as someone who also looks at the 2024 presidential race and looks at the alternatives besides Donald Trump, I am not sold or convinced that Ron DeSantis is this all-electable, all-encompassing candidate that Republicans need to prop up. For the sake of winning the primary, I think yes. For the sake of winning the general, I don't know who could do it. I stand by my point that I think Nikki Haley could win the election, but the question is, does she make it to the primary? But for Ron DeSantis, after a number of recent arguments when it comes down to with Disney, with his national presence, being perceived as someone who's anti-gay, the American public is very much not on his side with the 6-week ban or the ban on, on the word gay, these things that are perceived nationally. The discussion about sexual orientation, that ban being pushed all the way up to 12th grade. I mean, many of us are either in high school, have graduated high school recently, or maybe not, right? But what we know is that people have these conversations quite early. And I'm not here to defend or oppose or say anything about the contents of the bill, but what I am saying is that to the American public, and you can see it in the approval or disapproval, namely the disapproval of these bills, the disapproval of these actions by the national GOP, what Ron DeSantis is doing is making himself unelectable. I think once I've started to pay closer attention to Ron DeSantis, I've started to realize that he's not this godlike figure for the GOP that can usher in Reagan types of victories. He's far from it, and he's far from the best choice. But it looks like the top two, especially the top, being Donald Trump, is not the best choice for the GOP. However, that's not my decision. That is their decision. The will of the voters is to lose the 2024 race. And if that's what happens, that is what happens. With Joe Biden on track to a steady and pretty simplistic and easy renomination, I look at this and say, this race can be called from today. And if I'm wrong, I'll eat it, right? If I'm wrong, I'll recognize that. But as of right now, as of where the national environment stands, even with President Biden's disapproval, I am confident that in this current state, in this rematch scenario, Joe Biden easily wins re-election. You can look back at my videos from 2021 and 2022 and see that I didn't always agree with that notion, that I thought that Joe Biden would lose even to a rematch of Donald Trump. I no longer believe that for a variety of reasons, and I think there's a lot of numbers that indicate that Biden's numbers do better, Trump's numbers do worse, not necessarily in the primaries, but Trump's numbers do worse in the general, post-indictment, based off the way the American public perceives him, and overall in terms of electability. Donald Trump is not the right guy for 2024. I don't think Ron DeSantis is either. A lot of questions are going to go out about who is the most electable. The problem is that voters don't always choose the most electable candidate, and that's going to be a very big problem, not only in the presidential, but in the down-ballot Senate, House, and gubernatorial races, because 2022 hit hard, but not for the Democrats. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.